Well, it's so nice to see you, Alex.
You too.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So we're going to have basically, we want to talk to you about, first of all, how it all started for you with languages and sort of your life as a multilingual and how it's developed really over the years, because it's been quite a journey from when I first met you, which was in Parma at an event, a Goethe Institute EU type event, wasn't it, that we met at?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
it's very important as well that because when we say we met in Parma, it's a bit ambiguous because of our British accents. So what we mean is Parma in Italy, not Palma in Spain. Because I don't know, people are like, oh, so you met in Spain? Well, no, Italy.
Yeah, and
if we're American, we would say Parma, and then everyone would understand.
Because I mean, this is the thing. Obviously, people all know about the sort of the history of you went into this competition and you won it for being the most multilingual student in the UK, and that's a few years ago now. You're catching me up in age, and but so since then, I mean, you were in Russia, I think, at the time, weren't you, when we first met, or you were just finishing your time in Russia?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've always kind of wondered, I'm like, how long is this Britain's most multilingual student thing going to last? Because, you know, now I sort of say UK's most multilingual students brackets 2012, but that's nearly a decade ago. And it's almost like saying, you know, Britain's most multilingual student brackets 1982. So I don't know how long that's going to stay, but it is kind of a label that's stuck, for better or for worse. So I guess it is what it is. I had no interest in becoming Britain's most multilingual student, and I had no interest in becoming a polyglot. I didn't even really know what one was. I think I'd heard the word vaguely, but it wasn't a word that was kind of in my vocabulary. What happened was, though, is that I've always liked languages my whole life, and I've always enjoyed learning them, and they've always been a big part of my life. I had two languages at home growing up, English and Greek. And then my dad lived in Japan when I was a kid, so I spent quite a lot of time in Japan, in Fukuoka, of all places, place of the last polyglot conference, not the last as in there's never going to be another one, but the most recent polyglot conference.
Yeah, in person, exactly.
In person. Yeah. Yeah, I think languages were just always there, you know, and I remember thinking, basically, it was one summer when I was 8, and I went to Greece. And basically, until that moment, my mum had always been speaking Greek to me, and I was never interested. I'd always reply in English and just say, what is this ridiculous game? But there was a summer when I was 8 where suddenly there was a change, which is when we went to Greece for quite a long time. And I'm an only child, which means that I don't have any brothers or sisters, which means that for a long time in the summer on your own with your parents, it can be quite boring. But there were all these kids around me kind of having this amazing time. But the problem was that they only spoke Greek, because I think at that age of 8, you know, no one's really learned English at a level where you can speak it to people proficiently. So I sort of realized the only way to kind of have a good summer and enjoy my life in the way that all these other people were kind of running around fishing and swimming and all this stuff was if I actually started learning Greek or started speaking it. So I basically, all those years of listening to my mum and not saying a word, that summer it started to come out. And by the end of that summer of just being there and realizing that Greek was not just this weird game that my mum would play, but actually a way to connect with people, I just started speaking. By the end of that summer, it was just coming out and it wouldn't stop. And then I was obsessed. I wanted to learn. And that's when I kind of realized actually that all languages are like that. Language is basically a kind of a key that allow you to unlock other cultures, that allow you to be able to connect with people that otherwise you wouldn't be able to connect with. And that's when I got hooked. So I started teaching myself languages. I started teaching myself a bit of German, a bit of Spanish, things like that, not very seriously. And then I think the big change was when I was 14. And I remember going to Amsterdam for the first time with my parents. And I remember sitting on the plane and hearing the security announcement in Dutch and just thinking, oh my God, what is this? What is this language? This is absolutely amazing. People wake up and dream in this language and fall in love in this crazy language. And then all day I was walking around Amsterdam just like trying to imitate the sounds. So that was that. I got myself a teach yourself Dutch book and basically studied it quite, you know, thoroughly for 6 months. I just wanted to know as much as I could. I used to sit on the tube on the way back from school going, school. Maar, gevaarlijk, and things like that. People would look at me like, sorry, I think people would be looking at me like I was a weirdo anyway. But that was basically when I started taking languages quite seriously as something that I enjoyed doing and something that I could do. And then it just kind of, Dutch led to Afrikaans, then Hebrew, then all sorts of stuff. And then eventually that led to me studying German and Russian at university. And I always wanted to study Russian, but I found it very hard to study on my own because I think it's one of those languages that you have to really commit to and you really have to study. So I wanted to study Russian at university because there was an intense course that involved living in Russia. And when I was preparing for that year of living in Russia, trying to find out some information, I was just kind of Googling various information about living abroad to try and get, you know, some pointers and some things to prepare myself. And I saw this advert that said, are you Britain's most multilingual student, or do you know Britain's most multilingual student? Because if you are, you could win an iPad. And I never had an iPad. So I thought, all right, may as well apply. So it was like, okay, what languages do you speak? And I was like, all right, well, English, Greek, German, Russian, Spanish, French, Dutch, Afrikaans. That's more or less it, isn't it?
Oh, Hebrew as well, I think you had at the time as well.
Yeah. And then I was like, well, I'm not going to win if I only put 7 languages, so I might as well give it a go with a few more. So then I put Italian, I put Catalan, I put all sorts of stuff, like, you know, languages that are not kind of my best languages at all, but I was like, well, you know, I can kind of speak them. I can sort of get by. So it came to about 11 languages altogether. And then I had nothing for months. I went to Russia, the snow came, all this stuff. I went back to Christmas came. I went back to London for Christmas. And when I was in London, I got this email saying, hi, we'd like to invite you for an interview next week where we're going to test you in these 11 languages. And I thought, oh God, why have I not spent the last 3 months improving all these languages that, you know, are not my best languages? Because I'm now going to be kind of in the dragon's den facing these people. So anyway, it was a nice Skype call, and I remember I was sitting on my bed in my mum's flat in London, you know, literally with the computer on my bed, because I didn't have an iPad at that stage because I hadn't won it. And it was an hour-and-a-half conversation with 11 different people around the world, kind of, you know, all sorts of people, you know, where they basically were drilling me on all these questions and kind of asking me weird stuff. And the Israeli guy, I remember, was really funny because he was just on a bus in London. So you could actually hear the bus announcements in the background. He was saying to me, so he was like, "כן, אז מתי אתה למדת את העברית? למה אתה רוצה ללמוד עברית? למה? מה קורה פה? אתה היית בישראל?" And all this stuff. I could hear, "The next stop is Trafalgar Square." So it was like this for an hour and a half. It was very weird. I don't know if you've ever had to speak every language you've ever learnt, studied, or vaguely dabbled in an hour and a half on the phone, but that's what it was. And it was quite exhausting. The Italian was quite nice because the Italian was the one I was most worried about because Italian is still my weakest language. And I remember the lady said to me, "Dove hai studiato l'italiano?" And I said, "Io non ho studiato l'italiano, ma capisco molto bene, posso parlare un po'." And she said, "Non hai studiato?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Wow, his Italian is amazing." And I was like, okay, so we got through that one. Anyway, yeah, so then at the end of this call, they were like, well, we think you are Britain's most multilingual student. So what we'd love is for you to come in, and it turned out they were just up the road in Hammersmith, by the way, you know, so I don't know why we did this, but thank God we did the Skype call because I think it would have been a bit scary if I'd been in the room with them. So we'd love you to come in and kind of collect your iPad and we might invite some journalists. I was like, yeah, whatever. I went back to Russia, got on with my life. And then I was like, okay, time to go back and do this. So I went back to the HarperCollins, because they were the people that organised the competition, the HarperCollins publishing house. And there they were kind of waiting for me with this BBC journalist. And my first question was, where's the iPad? And they're like, oh, we've got to go to the Apple store and buy it. I thought, well, I've come all the way from Russia for this. Anyway, so this lovely journalist, she's like, yeah, we'd love to make a video. It'd be great. Come up. It was so cold. It was about -2 degrees. We went out to this really dodgy park in Hammersmith where like, I've never seen anyone up to any good being there. And we spent 3 hours in the cold kind of recording this crazy. I was absolutely frozen by the end of it. And pushing back on some ideas. One of the ideas that the journalist had was that I would come down the slide in the playground going, "Bonjour les enfants et bienvenue à cette vidéo multilingue," and all this. And I was like, I think that's going to look a bit naff, so let's not do that. Anyway, so this happened. And the next day I woke up with the iPad, which they'd given me. And the iPad was blowing up, right? Because there was like thousands of notifications on Twitter, all this stuff, because this video had gone viral. I don't know how, but millions of people had, like millions and millions and millions of people had seen it. And then the phone wouldn't stop ringing, and I had all these crazy interviews. And I had this interesting interview with Israeli TV where all they wanted was for me to swear in Hebrew. And I was like, I didn't know you could swear in Hebrew. I thought it was such a kind of, clean and a proper language, but that was the TV show and they really liked it. And I thought, okay, I think it's time to go back to Russia and wait for all this to die down. So I did. Just got on with my little life, and things did die. It wasn't quite as crazy. Then there was another language prodigy that came along, the famous Tim Donor, who was younger and spoke more languages than me. So I was like, okay, he can have the limelight for a bit. And that was that. So it was a bit scary. I think no one really quite prepared me for the fact that I would go that viral in 2012, in a time when people didn't go viral, and viral for something that I never thought was particularly special, which was speaking languages. But it led to amazing things. And one of the things it led to, of course, was meeting you, becoming part of the polyglot community and all sorts of things like that. I've met all sorts of really inspiring people through that who've kind of helped me basically make a lot of important decisions about my life and languages that I want to learn. I'm quite grateful that the hype went down. So, because I had this feeling of like, I don't know, is this going to be some weird kind of multilingual Justin Bieber situation? Like, why when these people stop calling me? But it settled down. And basically ever since then, it's been a really nice thing. And I've just basically always lived my life. Languages have always been a really important part of my life. Even if I'm not actively learning new ones, I'm always using them. And the most important thing in my life has always been prioritizing, being able to use them, being able to work in them, being able to speak them. And that's why I live where I do in Barcelona, where we use 3 languages every day, and then all the other languages. It's really, really nice. And I think one of the things that inspired me to always live in a place like this was meeting so many people who'd lived their life that way. And I always thought about the fact that you, Richard, lived your life in so many languages, despite the fact that you come from Chester. And it's like, we have to make choices sometimes to be able to set up our lives. If I'd stayed where I was born, I wouldn't be speaking the languages I do every day. It wouldn't be such an important part of my life. And I'm sure that's true for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I love your stories. They're always interesting. I can see people writing comments. I think
I'll have
it's
to have a look at
hilarious.
them. I've got it closed.
I love it. I love it. No, what you say is true. I think there is a difference, obviously, with Chester and London. I think one of the things that stood out for me with you, particularly, Alex, was some of your language choices earlier on in your journey. Afrikaans isn't an obvious choice for someone from Chester, for example, but in London, you always talked about you would hear Afrikaans spoken quite a lot.
Everywhere. I couldn't move without hearing Afrikaans. It was ridiculous. I'd get on the tube and everyone would be talking in Afrikaans. And the hilarious thing is the things people say in Afrikaans, because Afrikaans is not a very difficult language to learn. If you speak German, you can kind of understand it, at least when it's written down. If you speak Dutch, you get most of it, right? But Afrikaners seem to think that it's like Sanskrit or something. It's this crazy language no one can understand. So everyone would sit there on the tube going, her boots look a bit crap, don't they? They go, oh yeah, she looks like she could go on a diet. And I was going, this is great. I need to understand this language because I want the drama of the tube, because it was just so much more fun. So yeah, I couldn't move for hearing Africa. There was this period basically where the UK had a fairly favorable visa policy towards South Africans, where they could basically just come for 6 months without a visa. And a lot of South Africans in the 2000s came. That ended sadly in 2009, and ever since then we've not heard as much Afrikaans on the street, and now it's very, very difficult for South Africans to travel anywhere in the world basically, because the visa requirements are crazy. But it was kind of, I think me learning Afrikaans was a symptom of that time when we had very free movement in the UK. And I remember, I don't live in the UK now for all sorts of reasons, but one of the things that I loved about living in the UK and growing up in the UK is that you really did get this sense, at least in London, that it was a place where the whole world was and the whole world could be. And you would see so many different people from so many different countries there kind of finding a home and being happy and enjoying being there, at least in the 2000s. That, it was just great. I think my happiest times in London sometimes were when I could just close my eyes and imagine that I wasn't there, I was anywhere else, because you'd hear all these languages, you'd hear all this food, all this culture, all this stuff from all over the world. And I just thought, wow, I'm so lucky to be in this place. Things have changed a little bit now, sadly. And I don't think people quite feel the same way, but that really was a big impetus for me to learn languages, connect with the world and get out there and live in different places.
So the other thing that's interesting is it did inspire you, didn't it, to go to South Africa as well and spend time there and learn languages. I mean, you even looked at some of the African languages, right, too?
Yeah, I'd love to learn more of them. I mean, I think South Africa is the most amazing country in the world, and I've said it many, many times. But one of the things for me that's so interesting about South Africa is that at the heart of everything is language. You just can't get away from it. You know, I mean, when we grew up as in the UK, we had this idea of South Africa as being sort of an Australia that spoke funny, right? It was like slightly weird accent Australia. That was our impression. That was it. And then when I discovered that they have 11 official languages, and actually only about 4.5% of the country speaks English as a first language, which means that, 95% of that country doesn't speak English as a first language. I just lost my mind. So, I've been to South Africa a lot. I've been very lucky to be able to go. And I've met wonderful people there, like Lindy, who I can see is chatting away, who showed me some beautiful sides of Johannesburg. And I just love being in a place where I can walk down the street and hear so many different languages around me. And that is South Africa.
Yeah, it is. It's a very special place. I agree. The time I spent there, I really, really enjoyed it too. And I think this is the thing, when you go to a place and you say, like South Africa, and you kind of, what you said about that just now, about everyone's multilingual, it's just not a thing, it's just the norm. And then you talk about the UK and the big sort of almost fanfare of you making this video of Alex Rawlings speaking all these languages, and it goes viral. Could you imagine that anywhere else? I mean, how does that?
Well, I actually had this experience once that I got invited by the American International School of Johannesburg to go and give a talk there on what was it, International Mother Tongue Day, something like that, a few years ago. So I said, all right, I got on a plane, trotted off down to the southern tip of Africa, like you do. Went to the American International School. But I got picked up I was staying in this hotel. I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's going to be interesting to people who know South Africa, but I was staying next to this place called Monte Casino, which is kind of the best and worst place in the world. And I got picked up by this driver who took me to the school. And it was really weird because we're like driving through Africa, right? And then suddenly we turn right and we're in America and there's basketball courts and like people, it was just like, what? And then we drive back out and we're back in Africa. But the driver was like, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, I've come from the UK. And he's like, UK, that's far. And I was like, I know, I had to come all the way here. And he said, well, why are you here? And I said, oh, well, they want me to talk to the kids about languages. And he's like, oh, how many languages do you speak? And I was like, oh, I don't know, like, because when people ask you that question, you're always a bit like, oh, well, how many languages do I speak?
A couple,
a few. And he was like, I speak 17. And I was like, what? And he was like, I speak 17 languages. And I was like, and you're the bus driver for this school. So the first thing I did is I went to the headmaster and I said, thank you so much for inviting me to this school. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for flying me all the way from London to Johannesburg on British Airways to come and talk to your school. But I did just want to point out, your bus driver speaks more languages than me, right? He was kind of really embarrassed and didn't really know what to say. But I was like, but what's going on here? Because we started to tap into some interesting things here, which is also about language choices and also about privilege, essentially, as being a European and particularly a British person who speaks multiple languages, that's something that's unusual. Whereas if you live in a country like South Africa, where basically if you can't speak 5 languages minimum, you're regarded as some kind of idiot. Speaking 17 languages fluently doesn't get you on the stage to talk to the kids. I mean, the closest you get is being their bus driver. And I just kind of thought, what's going on with the world? Why do people not value his languages? He speaks these very complicated languages. He spoke Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana, Sotho, Ndebele, English, Afrikaans, Portuguese. He spoke crazy languages that I haven't been able to learn. But yet there I am on the stage going, bonjour, comment ça va, and all this stuff, which everyone loves because it's a European language. But nobody gives that round of applause for hearing someone speaking in Ndebele. So it's very difficult. And I think, as European polyglots, European British polyglots, we get a lot of attention for doing what we do, which I've never thought is particularly exceptional. And it sits a little bit uncomfortably with me because I know that there is far more multilingual people out there in the world who don't do it because they want any attention. They don't do it because they want to get in the news. They do it because it's just a matter of survival. And I think the world has got a little bit of thinking to do about how it values different languages and how basically it values people from different cultures who speak different languages.
Absolutely. And this is one of the hashtags as well, multilingual is normal. That's for this day. And on the day of multilingualism, I think, it's really important to talk about this disparity between the price we put on some European language, perceived high value languages like English, French, German, or whatever, that people open schools and they make lots of money. Would they make the same money if they were to open schools for other languages? No, because economically it's not viable for some of them. But the actual real value for these languages should be and is really equal. I mean, like you say, learning a lot of these other languages that may be regional language, they may not be worldwide, sort of common currency for international trade, but that doesn't devalue or diminish the language in and of itself.
Yeah, and I think this sort of comes back to your question a while ago before I started going on my tangents, which is like, why do I learn such random languages? And I think, well, that's not exactly what you said, but that's how I understood it. I think the reason why is because, as I said, I was never interested in being a polyglot. I was never interested in being that person. If I was, I would have kind of worked through a list of the most commonly spoken languages and started with Mandarin, gone to Portuguese, gone to Spanish, gone to Russian, gone to, Hindi. I mean, there's kind of those lists you can see. And I understand why people do that, because it can be quite a nice motivation to think, wow, this language gives me so much coverage. But for me, the value of being multilingual has not necessarily come from those big hitter world languages, like Spanish. I think, where I live in Barcelona, we have a bilingual society of Spanish and Catalan, and Spanish is very much just a way to speak for most people. It's just, I need something, we speak Spanish, okay? But the strongest connections I've had with people has actually been when we start speaking Catalan, and then people kind of really, they see you differently. They're like, wow, you're a foreigner who's come here from an English-speaking country, and you want to learn my language. The connection is much deeper. So for me, learning those small languages has always been really, really important, because I feel like it gives you access to quite an exclusive club. And it's quite a very special feeling, actually, to feel like you belong to a small and exclusive linguistic society, where once you get in, you often see people don't always have such a high image of their own language. And people often devalue it against larger languages that they perceive to be of more importance. And so, it's always been a huge motivation for me. I want to connect with people, and I want to understand different ways of thinking. And, that's why I've learned such random languages.
Yeah, I can totally identify with what you're saying about people not viewing their own language as valuable as other languages. And I've had those kinds of very odd conversations myself, where you're sort of almost trying to convince the speaker of the language that actually, what you're saying, what you speak is actually valid. It's very, very strange to be in that position. And again, the idea of connecting with somebody on a language that maybe isn't the major language or the main language of the country, it's always a very different connection that you make.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I mean, for example, with you learning more languages, you say that you're not obviously collecting them, but I kind of got this out of Lindy too. She tried to be very politically correct and say, oh no, I'm just concentrating on the languages that I like now and want to improve them. And I said, come on, Lindy, I can see a glint in your eye there. Which other languages have you got on your list? Because you do love languages, and you love it, Alex. I mean, it's in your blood.
Of course I do.
So which languages are on your to-do list, or you'd love to explore the regions more, or connect with people more? Which things sort of in your, I want to do this next?
Yeah, well, I'm not saying this to be politically correct. This is genuinely how I've been feeling for the last few years, actually. It's like, I feel like I've got quite a lot of languages. Like I feel like
it's not enough.
I feel like I've got quite a lot. And I think, I've never worked through a list on the kind of bucket list of languages. I've always learned the languages that are there or the languages that I've needed. And those languages as languages that are still there and languages that I still need. But as kind of, time goes on, I feel the need to know them in greater detail, and I feel the need to be able to express myself in greater detail and reach more advanced levels. So for the time being, I'm still learning languages. I'm still studying language and thinking about it, but I'm not about to start picking up something totally random to my life and start giving loads of time for that just to get to an A1 level in, say, Tagalog. I mean, obviously it'd be amazing to learn Tagalog. And every now, so we have little holidays, we're like, oh yeah, let me listen to a nice Tagalog podcast. But let's be honest, like, unless I make some very serious life changes, which I can't imagine myself doing right now, it's not going to be an important part of my life right now. So I'd much rather keep going very, very deep with the languages that I've got, feeling more and more fluent. I mean, because it's very exciting to be able to speak a new language. There's those very special moments, right? Like when you say your first sentence, when you make your first joke, when you say your first sentence using more than one tense. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but we've all got those moments, right? It's really, really nice. But there's even more moments that come later in the journey, which is when you're able to express a thought exactly as you would in your native language, when you're able to feel completely free speaking that language, when you don't have to resort to just kind of smiling and nodding and going see, but you can actually just say what you want and say it in a convincing way. And what I've had for the last few years of living in Barcelona is, as I see that happening with my Spanish more and more, because it's a language I use every day, and I really enjoy going deeper and deeper and learning more words. So for the time being, there's no new languages on the list. I think I've got enough balls to be juggling. Maybe I will start learning new languages as I start traveling again and that kind of thing. But for the time being, I'm very happy where I am.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you mean, and I totally respect it. I mean, there is something to be said about consolidating the knowledge you have. I mean, I think I've got to the point as well where it's language projects that I look at. I still like the thrill of that starting phase of learning a language. I still find it very exciting. But then there are the core languages that I stick to, and they're my main groups of languages, right? But I still, obviously you going out to South Africa, obviously when travel's possible again, going back to South Africa, would you go back to, is it Zulu you were studying?
I want to do all of them. I think the problem with South Africa is you don't know where to start. The language I really want to learn is Tswana or Sotho, but those are the ones with like very few resources. It's really, really difficult to learn them. So Zulu is the one with the most resources, I'd say. But it gets very complicated, because like the Zulu you're learning is like very, very pure, proper Zulu that kind of very high society people speak in Durban. And I've been to Durban once. It was very nice. They've got lovely beaches. But the place that I love going is Johannesburg. And there they speak, basically, most people who speak Zulu are not native speakers of Zulu. They actually speak Sotho, which means that they often don't pronounce the clicks in quite the same way, because Sotho doesn't have as many clicks. They speak the grammar. It's a different dialect, essentially, of Zulu, which is spoken by non-native speakers. And that's impossible to learn from any book or any kind of course, because people just won't teach it to you. They'll teach you the really kind of formal stuff. And then, when you speak that to kind of, a taxi driver in Johannesburg, they basically just laugh because you sound so ridiculous, So I don't know. I mean, it's a problem. I've had this problem with a couple of languages. I always wanted to learn Arabic, for example, but then I realized that kind of the only route to learning, I've had this problem with Arabic, for example, where I always wanted to kind of learn Arabic, and then I had the problem of, well, which Arabic do I learn? And then it's like, well, you have to learn Fusha, and obviously you have to go through that. But I think it's a little bit demoralizing to have to think of the fact that you're going to go through a phase of several years where you basically sound like, a newsreader when you're trying to buy a pint of milk. But having spoken with people who really study that Arabic, like Alexander Arguelles, I understand that you have to kind of go through that, but it's a little bit of like, okay, I have to psych myself up for that.
Yeah, there is a sort of this, when you have these languages where you have a very different written or standard form, and then how people speak on the street, when there's a huge disparity between the two, it can be a little bit disconcerting. And definitely remember when I first started learning Macedonian, my wife said to me, "Oh, don't speak like we do on the street. Just learn the book version." I said, "But that's not how people use the language." And if I'm going to be integrating into society, I don't really want to sound like a weird book and sort of clash with the rest of the conversation. So I totally get what you mean. Some languages do it less than others.
Because I like to think I don't sound like a weird book when I speak English, and when I speak English, I just kind of am myself. And that feeling of comfort and that feeling of fluency is something I aspire to in every language. But you're not going to get there if you just speak like a textbook.
Yeah, exactly. We've got some questions coming in, so which is great. And I see one here about the about Fusha and one of the dialects. So saying it's unfortunate. I don't know how, have you perceived any change in this? From what I've seen online, I think I'm starting to see a shift in people learning dialects before Fusha a little bit more than before. Have you noticed anything like that as well, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's more awareness of the fact that, you know, Moroccan Arabic might be as different from Lebanese Arabic as like Portuguese to French. You know, I mean, it's like there's an awareness of the fact that some of those dialects don't really understand each other that well. But at the same time, I think, I don't know, basically all of the kind of the advanced stuff, the really good stuff, the places where language companies are investing money is in modern standard Arabic, which is Fusha still. But I hope that does improve. I guess there's all sorts of problems as well, you know, like small languages. I mean, Egyptian Arabic is one of the most commonly spoken languages in the world, you know, but for the purposes, let's call it a smaller language. When you get into that field, you find all sorts of problems. Like, for example, it's hard to get hold of written materials. It's hard to get hold of literature. I actually said I don't want to sound like a weird book. It wasn't Richard's. So anyway, and there's often problems even just in finding out a writing system that can capture some of those sounds and stuff, you know. So when you start learning, I've seen, for example, Levantine Arabic books where the whole thing's in Latin, you know, which is kind of ridiculous. Why do you want to learn Arabic through Latin? What a huge distraction. It's not Maltese, you know. So I think it's getting better. I think you're right. But I still think it's a bit more of a challenge for the average person who doesn't have direct contact with a specific culture and isn't in that country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Maltese, actually, because I think Maltese is a really nice gateway language into Arabic as well. I mean, if you've got a reason or a need to learn Maltese and a desire, because it is naturally written with the Latin, well, an adapted Latin script. And people say that it's got quite a large amount of mutual intelligibility with Tunisian Arabic.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah, so maybe that's the way. Maybe the future is Maltese.
The future is Maltese. God, I mean, you only hear it at the Polyglot Conference, don't you? The future is Maltese.
Don't be a bozo, move to gozo.
Oh God, I'm trying to think of something to say so we can move on from that hanging in the air. Oh God, why do you do this to me, Richard? There's people listening to us talking in Cafe Nero.
Just trying to distract you a little bit, Alex, that's all.
Well, one thing I was going to say is that I don't want to kind of start talking about Arabic because I don't know anything about Arabic. So, you know, it's not very interesting for anyone to listen to anyone talking to something they don't know anything about. But my perception is that there's an awful lot of French that's used, particularly in Moroccan, Algerian and Tunisian Arabic, kind of words thrown in and things like that. Which may also complicate things if you don't already speak French and you want to learn those languages. I mean, the first time I actually went to South Africa in my life, I was there with some people from Morocco, and I remember it was a mother and son, and they'd always be shouting at each other. And every now and then you'd hear this word like chambre, and I was like, oh, they're talking about the bedroom. Wow, my Arabic is good.
I love it. There's a question here about smaller languages that are on the verge of extinction. How did you go about learning languages like that? Have you had an experience of this? What sort of advice would you give people?
Well, I think it's very difficult to speak about it in broad terms because, you know, even though we talk about small languages and languages on the verge of extinction as though they are a single entity, every single one is very, very different, and every single one has different circumstances around it. Most recently, I kind of had a lot of contact with Tsakonika language, which is spoken in the south of Greece, where basically where my parents live. And you've got a very interesting situation there, which is that for a long time, people thought it was a useless language spoken by peasants. And everyone would be just a lot better off if they just learned proper Greek. But the last few years, I don't know what it is. I think there has been some kind of awareness around the world about these issues, and it's even reached southern Greece, you know. But the last few years, people have started to take a bit more interest in it, and the kids are doing stuff in school about it, not kind of lessons or anything, but they do a play in Tsakonika every year. And there's some really amazing language activists there who basically create a lot of language learning materials. They make a video every week in Tsakonika. And Tsakonika is a very special language, you know, it's actually the only surviving direct descendant of the language spoken by the ancient Spartans. So it's very, very important that it kind of is kept alive. in terms of learning it, I mean, again, the problems I found with that again is that Tsakonika has retained a lot of sounds that were spoken by the ancient Spartans and also more widely in ancient Greek dialects that are now no longer used in modern Greek. So for example, all sorts of different U sounds and things like that. And the modern Greek alphabet, well, modern Greek is written as ancient Greek was written, but we don't pronounce the sounds, if that makes sense. So that means that all of the different vowel sounds and everything that were in ancient Greek have now basically been flattened into 5 vowel sounds. So it's really ironic, right? It's like we don't say those sounds anymore, but we still write them. But that means if you want to write them to represent them in Tsakonika, everyone's going to misread them because they pronounce them as modern Greek. So, you know, learning Tsakonika is really hard if you're not there, just because it's a language that's almost impossible to write and has never been written. It's always been a spoken language, and now people are trying to write it, but nobody agrees about how we should write it, which means that kind of there's this internal war going on in a community of 400 speakers, you know, where people just don't know what to do about it.
It reminds me of the Cornish. Cornwall had this thing with Cornish as well, didn't they? With this,
the 2 sisters, didn't they? And they had an argument.
They couldn't decide which standard to use, and they fought for ages. And then there was funding available from the government, from the UK government, and all of a sudden we could find an agreement. So we now have a unified Cornish. Maybe that'll happen as well in Greece. Who knows?
Maybe. Well, I mean, funding from the government is not something that happens very often in Greece for anything. So that may be a bit of an aspiration there, but the really good thing that's happening there is that people are starting to understand the importance of it. The problem is it's very late, you know, basically no one under the age of 60 speaks the language anymore. And there's a couple of reasons why. The first thing that happens is that this community was isolated for kind of thousands of years, literally. And then in the 50s, they opened the road to Athens. It's a very small road. It takes hours and it's like this. But anyway, they opened that road and half the population left. And they went to Athens, they went to Australia, they went to America, they went to the UK, Germany, everywhere you can imagine. You know, there's a huge Greek diaspora around the world. And a lot of them come from this area, which has always been very deprived. So that happened, people lost the language. The other thing that happened, and this happens in a lot of places, is the arrival of mass media and TV, where suddenly, you know, people sitting in this village would never hear modern Greek because it just wasn't really something they'd come in contact with. And suddenly it's on TV all day, every day, and actually they need to understand it to get information. So, you know, suddenly they start tuning into that more than their own language, you know. So a number of reasons why this language has just basically become very minoritized and is now very critically endangered. Actually, it's one of the most endangered languages in Europe, you know, which is very, very sad. So to learn it, obviously I'd love to learn. I've got all the books actually from Eleni somewhere on my book. I've moved so many times in my life, everything's always in a box. But they're there, so we can start learning things. And if you look up, they're called, if you're interested in finding out specifically about Tsakonika, which I think is an interesting language, the organization is called Tsakono Parea. Parea is a word in Greek for a group of friends, and Tsakono is the word for Tsakonika. They produce a lot of stuff on social media. They have a website. They're very, very active, and they're very nice people.
We'll put a link in it as well when the video comes out on YouTube so that people can find it more easily. I think probably that's a good piece of advice just generally for some of these languages. If you're interested in learning them, that would be one of my main pieces of advice for anyone really, is to connect with the community, see what kind of materials are available, meet people who speak the language, and get involved in the community that are using it, because it's amazing where you find pockets of communities, especially now in a digital age where they either have a community on Twitter, sometimes they prefer Twitter, sometimes Facebook, sometimes Instagram. It's just worth looking around and seeing where you can find them.
Greece is very on Facebook. I think it's one of the only countries that still uses Facebook in a huge way. So everything is there.
Yeah, so there we go. So you can reach out for sure. And you know, anybody, if you find communities like that for small languages and you think it's helpful, you can always add them to the comments as well of this video, so that more people can find these communities more easily when they do searches. Yeah, I mean, I find it, obviously, you know that I find all of these smaller languages and vulnerable, endangered, and languages, indigenous languages, extremely important. And it's one of the reasons why, as part of the conference, there's always a stage and always a platform for them to be heard. And I hope that will continue for years and years to come, and that other people will take over that role of helping to promote as well, long after I'm gone, because they're part of our heritage. They're part of a rich tapestry, right? We started this conversation, Alex, with you coming from London, which is full of lots of languages, having mixed heritage yourself with the Greek. And languages are just a rich tapestry of where we come from, and they depict the country, the region, the area, and then globally. And as we move around as well, it's nice to think that everyone and every language and every culture has a place, and they can interact on an overarching layer, but also what they have that makes them special and specific can also be recognized, acknowledged, and respected.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what multilingualism is about as well, is knowing that not everyone's going to know all the same languages in a society, and that's fine. But acknowledging that they exist and that they also have a place within the society is the important thing.
Absolutely. And I think respecting them, I think, I don't think we always see a lot of respect for other languages, you know, and that doesn't sit very comfortably with me. I think people are always very quick to find reasons why you shouldn't learn a language, and why, you know, any language, but it goes all the way from kind of big languages to small ones. And, you know, growing up in the UK, I think one of the things that I never realized is that even though we have all this this multilingualism and linguistic diversity in London, for example, where I grew up, or big cities, you know, with languages from all over the world, one of the things I never fully realized that the UK itself is indigenously quite a diverse and multilingual society. Yet we don't know anything about it, you know. I mean, we have so many languages in the UK that have been there longer than English, you know, languages like Welsh, all of the Celtic languages, Irish, all this stuff. But they're totally invisible. They're totally invisible unless you live in those countries. Well, those countries, those you know, places like Wales, places like Scotland, things like that. And but I've never understood why. You know, why don't we celebrate them? I would have loved to have learned about those languages at school. But there's, you know, even within those societies, you have people who make these kind of ridiculous arguments, like, oh, why are we funding the Welsh language? We should fund the NHS, which is the health service in the UK. And it's kind of like, no one's saying we should fund the NHS and revive Welsh. You know, like, why is it kind of an either or?
Why is it an either or?
I think everyone should have access to healthcare and be able to learn indigenous languages in the UK. Is that a controversial statement? You know, I mean,
be able to access the NHS and in Welsh.
And in Welsh, why not? Yeah, well, actually, it's funny about that, because when I lived in university, I shared a house with 3 guys, and one of them was a native Welsh speaker. And I remember when we were moving out of the house, we were trying to cancel our contract with British Gas. So we called the number, and it was like, oh, you are in a queue, your call isn't, you know, all that stuff. And basically, if we trying to contact the customer service in English meant we would have been on the phone for like an hour trying to get through to them. But then my friend said, oh, why don't we just use the Welsh line? So he called the Welsh line straight through in seconds. You know, I just imagined this kind of call center in Aberystwyth or somewhere full of people going, oh, I wonder when someone's going to call British Gas in Welsh. And then there we were, and then quickly cut us off, quickly dealt with everything, refunded the money. And we went on with our day, you know, with all these hours back. So, you know, there's even advantages to speaking languages like Welsh if you live in a country like the UK.
What a beautiful way to end this discussion.
Are you trying to end the discussion? I'm sorry, I didn't realize. I thought we had another 15 minutes.
Well, normally we round things off at about 45 minutes
Okay.
to give me a chance to have a break in between. Although I could listen to you forever, and I'm sure many other people could too.
Well, I couldn't, so I'm glad you're ending the conversation.
Fantastic. But it's a great note. It's a great story to end it on, because it does show that there are benefits to learning other languages, particularly indigenous languages of a country where they offer services in those languages, like
and
Welsh.
when you need to contact British Gas.
Exactly. So please go out there, learn Welsh, dysgu Cymraeg, and get your gas sorted when you go to London.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Well, diolch yn fawr, Richard. It's been really nice to speak with you, and thank you everyone for chatting. Sorry, I've had the chat box open and sort of seen stuff popping up. I haven't been able to address stuff directly, but you can find me. I hang around on the internet. I have a website, I have social media. I'd be very happy to receive any messages from you.
Yeah, and we'll pop some links for Alex as well into the video, of course, so that you can reach out to him. And Yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Στα ελληνικά.
Ναι.
I got you.
Yeah, you got me. You got me. Zulu, right?
Exactly. Oh, Lindy got it. There we go.
Thank you very much.
Take care, guys.
Καλή συνέχεια.
Και χαρούμενη μέρα της πολυγλωσσίας.